Hey, what's going on? It's Scott. I worked in law enforcement for several years, and during my time on patrol, I did get into some foot chases. Fortunately, I caught more than got away. However, there are things you can do to prepare yourself for a foot chase prior to actually getting into one. And then there's techniques you must focus on when you're in a foot chase. And then there's the legal side. Just because somebody runs does not mean you have the right to chase them. I'll never forget when I worked with a captain who saw some guy sprinting across a street, and he thought to himself, well, that looks a little suspicious. But a few minutes later, the call comes out at a nearby store that there was a larceny, and it gave the description of the suspect, and it was the guy that the captain saw. But the captain got on the radio and said, here's the last place I saw him going, but I didn't run after him because it's not illegal to run across the street. There's things you have to adhere to legally. We're going to talk about all that, and I'm going to be assisted by Officer Brandon Blanchard. He's been a cop for several years. Let's go.
When it does come to catching the bad guys, there's times where you pull up on a scene and they will run, and it is up to the police to catch them. So we're going to dive into the subject of foot chases, prepping your mind and your body. And what advice would you give about that?
I personally, and I'm obviously kind of biased, but I think physical fitness is probably one of the top 3 things that I would probably say, especially new officers, but I think officers in general have to keep in their brain, right? You can be the best shooter in the world. You can be the top shot, the guy that can just do all the things and all that stuff, and that's great. But if you're not physically fit, when that adrenaline dump hits and you are in that big fight, in that big moment, if you're not in shape and you can't control your breathing and you don't know how to control that stress, it doesn't really matter how good you can shoot. Same thing goes for a foot pursuit or honestly a vehicle pursuit. If your heart rate is through the roof because you're not in shape and you have poor cardiovascular conditioning, then, it just makes everything harder and makes everything more challenging. And I think safety is important. I think understanding your angles when you run, I think understanding, someone's body language, right? Because here's the thing, it's not just about, okay, I'm a track star now, I'm going to run after this person, I'm going to tackle them. It's like, no, like the Supreme Court tells us, our job is constantly evolving and ever rapidly changing. And so is a foot pursuit. So as soon as that foot pursuit starts and you give chase, you have to be watching that person. You have to be watching what that person is doing with their hands, all of those things, because that foot pursuit can turn into a lethal force situation very quickly.
A good piece of advice that I got when I first started, to which I adhered to, and was to mentally rehearse scenarios in your head. And I remember I rehearsed what I would do if someone bailed out of a car on foot on a traffic stop. And sure enough, the first time it happened, I did what I rehearsed in my mind as I'm running after the guy. I couldn't believe it. Like I'm running after the guy thinking to myself, oh my gosh, it's working. So that's another thing I would add to that, is to mentally rehearse in addition to staying in shape. What do you recommend so far if someone wants to work on their ability to be faster or, keep up their endurance so they can be sufficient on a foot chase?
In my opinion, there's so many like fitness programs out there, do this, do that. I don't do that, right? I don't tell people how to work out. I don't tell people any of those things. I share my journey. I share my workouts. I share the things that I do because I'm still coached, right? I still have a coach that I go through for my, I don't know if you know this, but I'm a natural pro bodybuilder. So like I compete for money in bodybuilding competitions, but I do it naturally, drug-free. So for me, if I want to be faster, I need to do sprints. If I want to just have good cardiovascular conditioning, I need to run long distance. But if I want to get better at running, you have to run. And there's so many other little things, right? Like explosion, right? I want to be able to explosively get off of my butt and move to another position, right? I want to be able to move laterally if I have to. If I do get into some type of critical incident where a firearm is used, and I have to backpedal, I want to be able to laterally move with my firearm, not just backpedaling all the time and trip over something, right? I want to be able to be in control. Some of the stuff that I do personally is I always warm up before I train. I have a treadmill in my basement. I'll do 30-60s, where you run for 60 minutes, you rest for 30, or you run for 30, you rest for 60, however, whatever level you're at. I always prep my body before that. So I will do lateral movements, right? So I will do karaoke's, where you twist your feet up and down, and just to make my hips loose and make myself feel loose, no matter how much muscle I have, no matter, how much older I get, I want to have the benefit of movement in my body. What I started doing is I just started like getting out of my car and just walking around, around. Moving,
something simple.
Doing something simple.
Technical question. What kind of boots do you wear?
They're like Nike's high speed light boot. I used to wear Danners, old school, just super cop looking boots, right? Like when you see those, you're like, that's a cop. And then I transitioned to the Nikes because they were just so light on my feet. Nike SF, that's what they are.
I was a big fan of the Under Armour Val sets. I wore those for probably 10 years. Loved them.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But they're light. They were great. But when it comes to the gear, the tack vest, the belt, any advice on making sure that while you're running after somebody, your gear is not getting all out of line or falling off?
When I first put my stuff on, I don't like do a sprint or anything, but I will jump around. I will jump and I will move. And obviously I don't do it every single day or anything, but I do it a lot just to make sure that things stay in place. This is something specific. Having a really, really, really good inner belt. If you still have to have those, like if you still have the traditional inner belt with like the Velcro actual duty belt, because the inner belt that you get issued, it has like the black leather on the other side, so you can wear it for like formal events or something. That's not a very good belt, right? That's just kind of a standard belt, probably $30 maybe at the most. I've always prided myself on having really, really strong back and hips, and that's because of the time I've spent, traditionally deadlifting, traditionally squatting, being really strong, but also I added my cardiovascular conditioning as well. And I think that's super important when you think about a duty belt and a vest.
So someone runs. We can't just run after somebody all the time just because they ran from the police. There's legal grounds there. So say someone is in training right now, what would you tell someone?
I would prefer a crime have been committed.
Yep.
If I'm going to chase after somebody, that's probably going to be the first thing that I would bring up. One of the things I think of a lot is I think of use of force case laws. I think of Tennessee v. Gardner, right? So, the kid ran in the backyard and the officer shot him. Well, let's take shooting out of the picture, right? Let's just say that it's that type of situation where there's an in-home burglary and the resident is still inside the house and someone like runs. That's probably going to be a pretty good chase. I would probably recommend you probably try to chase that person, because if they're burglarizing somebody's home and someone's actually in the home, I mean that intent is for what their mindset is or what they're trying to accomplish, can be articulated as that's pretty high. The severity of the crime is high, the immediacy of the threat is high. If they're running, they're obviously trying to evade you by flight. And obviously, if you give commands, police, they don't stop, and that's obviously them resisting as well. So you've kind of, in terms of your use of force, Graham B. Connor, you've kind of hit all of those right on the head in terms of that. So I think that some of the things that I would tell a younger officer, the days of just doing things because we're the police is kind of over. The days of doing something and then explaining it later or coming up with something later is over. Like, and I don't even mean that of like doing something like nefarious or you're being unethical. I mean it in the sense of I did this because instinctually it made sense to me, but now I have to. But now once everything's said and done, and I'm doing a report, I now have to articulate why I did what I did. No,
yeah, that's kind of like officers acting on a hunch or a suspicion in general, not reasonable, articulable suspicion based on articulable facts that a crime has just occurred.
Exactly.
No, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of the point that I'm making is as that young officer, if I was field training someone, my first question is, okay, why? Like, even if we're in the middle of it, I'm like, why are we chasing? Why are we chasing? I'm not going to yell that because I need you to tell me why. You can't just say because they ran. That doesn't work. That's not going to stand up in court. Because what if you do have to use force on this person? Like, let's take guns and knives out of the fight. But what if you literally just have to put this person in some type of restraint hold and now their shoulder's broken or whatever? We have to be able to answer those questions, right? We have to stand before that green table and say, hey, commander, whoever, this is why I did what I did. For us in Iowa, if someone gets into a pursuit and people then flee from the car on that pursuit, and you're the officer that has pursued that vehicle, in Iowa, we are very, very, at least in my agency, we're very careful with chasing after people on vehicle pursuits until we've actually cleared that vehicle that we've pursued. Mm-hmm. Because there's too many unknown factors within that. We don't want to run past it and just forget all about it. Because a lot of times for us, our drivers usually stay. It's people in the cars that flee. Our driver is our driving force within that actual vehicle pursuit. We want to stay with that car. I would essentially just have to explain to that officer or have that officer explain to me, why are you chasing that person? You have to understand your limitations. If you are a really fast person, you played soccer, you ran cross country, you did track and field, okay, great, right? You'll probably win a lot of foot chases. But if you're that average person that just works out, you may not win foot chases. Because remember, you are always reacting to the suspect. Don't think that just because you're in shape and you're young that you're going to catch this person, because you may not. Be preparing for, if I can't chase this person, how can I keep eyes on? How can I maintain some type of visibility, call out where they are and their description? That's probably one of the biggest things that I could probably recommend.
All right, there you have it. I appreciate Officer Blanchard coming onto the channel to talk about foot pursuits. Look, the training never stops, the learning never stops, so keep at it, all right? 2 more pieces of advice, though, regarding foot pursuits. 1, do not run into the woods after somebody if you are by yourself. Do not. Also, 2, if you do not know where you are and you're not familiar with the street names, it's not worth chasing after the suspect, because if you get into a fight or something bad happens, something dangerous, and you don't know where you are, that's not good. You have to play it safe. I look forward to talking to you again in another video. Go ahead and click right here for your guide on morale. Take care of yourself, and may God bless.